Hello and welcome to my 3.27 guide to Earthshatter Berserker using Impale and also explaining war cries and everything else related to the war cries and why I have my passive tree set up the way it is. For the defenses, the Molten Shell is not enabled, so you still have very, very high max hit. This setup, you are actually like nerfing your tankiness in order to fit Impale in. Impale is a huge damage multiplier for Earthshatter, and this buff effect cluster, as long as you are using your Enduring Cry every like 4.9 seconds, is just as good, barely, as this life recovery wheel. The life recovery wheel is more, but this is way more damage, and I'll get into that. But how to actually calculate your Earthshatter DPS is, if you see anybody doing any of this count stuff, like initial impact count times 2, this is entirely fluff. If you see spike count times 2, this is closer to what your actual DPS is on single target. One thing that nobody has mentioned about Earthshatter is that you can only hit an enemy with one spike. You cannot shotgun all 6 spikes into an enemy. It does not work that way. I may be wrong on this, but I believe the spikes do count as like a hit for Impale removal, but they don't reapply Impale. It's kind of weird. I don't know how to explain it, but just trust me that you want Impale in your Earthshatter tooltip. How I get the Impale is 60% from the support, you have 20% chance from Harpooner, and then you have this Impale Mastery, which makes it so that sometimes you're just going to completely remove all Impales on an enemy. And then Forceful Skewering as the Anoint. This is very, very cheap. This gives you that extra 15%, so then you're at 95, and then you just take this Impale chance right here, and that sets you to 100%. If I remove Impale entirely from the build, this build will do like 2 million less single target damage over the course of an entire second. If you are paying attention to attack rate and everything else about Impale, with how the skill works with the initial hit and the spike, then the actual like breakpoint that you need is 2.5 attacks per second, because you are basically double hitting with the skill through the initial impact and the spike damage. So as long as you have frenzy charges up, you will always be at that breakpoint, as long as you have a Giga Axe just like this with 1.38. The higher attack speed axe you have, the better your Impale uptime is going to be. That is why something like the Void Axe that Ben crafted is actually kind of goated, in my opinion, because then you just always have really high uptime. The one downside is that it'll make your double damage procs way less, because this boot and belt combination does not have the brutal charges. The double damage that you gain from Intimidating Cry is very, very impactful. And that is why we use this Warcry Mastery. This is such a huge benefit when it does happen with Earthshatter. So I'm going to reset this all back to the standard 1000 DPS wall axe. And, oh yeah, disable frenzy charges, because realistically in bossing situations, you're not going to have them up. And then we are going to go to Calcs, Earthshatter, uptime. This is the number of exerts versus the number of attacks. I currently have a 70% uptime. If you just set your Intimidating Cry to like a random buff effect, your damage falls off, your uptime goes down to 60% in this PoE with this current attack rate. The higher attack rate you get, the more cooldown recovery you are going to need. So Calcs, 57% uptime now. So this is why Intimidating Cry, having high quality, is incredibly impactful. Look, you get like a ridiculous amount of quality, you now have ridiculous amount of uptime, your damage goes through the roof. And realistically, if you actually had 100% uptime of your Intimidating Cry, your DPS goes from like 9 point something mil to like 13, 12, whatever it would be. So the cooldown recovery rate is incredibly important. If you can get like a 23% quality Intimidating Cry, that puts you at a 68% uptime as long as you have frenzy charges. If you don't have frenzy charges, that's 71%. You can add a lot of these Warcaller cooldown recovery rate on your strength. You just need to make sure that you still have 290 something strength left over for the purpose of a endgame royal plate, which is 293 strength. That's why getting strength on any open suffix, if you can fit it, is always going to be a benefit for your character. Like if these boots had, if the boots had like 60 strength on them, you can fit a little bit more Warcry cooldown recovery rate into the build. Once you get the brutal charges, the Warcry cooldown recovery rate kind of matters a lot less, because any hit that would be exerted by Intimidating Cry, sorry, I'm very sick. Any hit that would be converted to a double damage, if it rolls triple damage, then it replaces that double damage, making it a lot less relevant. The other thing though, anybody who's played this build, as I've talked about this, is kind of like having this aha moment of, this is also just 18% more damage for overexert. So overexert gains 18% damage as long as you are exerting the attacks. This means that like 30% of the time, I am not exerting that additional damage. Like if you were to path up here, grab these nodes, you're then at like 95% uptime. So it is a huge damage increase in order to path up there, but that's a lot of points. Even if I drop down these points, I'm still like not enough to fit both Impale and everything else. So this is why when I make my character, this is just what I'm going to do. Get as much of these as possible, the cooldown recovery rate, get high as quality as possible on Intimidating Cry, because I don't plan on using the brutal charges plus the boots, because it just, the ceiling that it creates is just not that dramatically high enough for me to want to go for it. I'd rather just have the character be more tanky, more max life. So the other thing is that you can drop Forceful Skewering and this node if you get like 7% Impale chance on like every single jewel. That means that you need 4 prop jewels, not just 3 prop, but you need 4 prop. So 7% times the 4 available jewels that you do have in this PoE. One here, one here, one here, and one here. None of these are 4 prop, but if you were to have 4 prop jewels, Impale is goated. Because I'll put you at 21%. One of them can be 6%. And that means that then you can drop Forceful Skewering, and you can drop this Impale chance here, and still be at, your 100% chance to impale. And then you can anoint Deep Breaths, which does give you a damage boost because this is going to apply to your Intimidating Cry. If I were to reset this and do everything else, I'm just going to do 35% increased. What is the wording on this? Increased Warcry cooldown recovery rate. That then bumps it up to 82%. So that is impacting both the double damage chance and it's impacting the overexert gem. But because you're most likely going to have to like move around to do boss mechanics and everything, 80% is more reasonable with a slower hitting weapon and ability combination like this. But like 50% chance if you just have like a 4% and like none of the cooldown recovery rate, everything else like that, is a lot less damage. It means that like you basically can move around 50% of the amount of time and your DPS is just not really going to drop. Yeah, so just things to consider if you're making your Earthshatter POB. Why Warcry Mastery is really good for the 3 additional exerts. No matter what cooldown I set this to, if I have, because it doesn't properly calculate this, I'm going to remove this. I'm going to go to Intimidating Cry, set this to 0. It is still 100% uptime if you proc that 10% of the time. So you will have burst situations where your DPS is going to be substantially higher. Before I was around like 9 mil DPS, a little bit more. Now we are approaching like 11 mil DPS. So your actual DPS is probably going to be closer to like, I don't know, 9.5, maybe even 10 mil. Like if you get lucky on this and then you get lucky on your Impale Mastery for removing all the impales, as long as you meet that attack speed requirement by getting like enough frenzy charges and everything else, you will have situations where your damage is just like way higher than what it would feel like in game. This is how you calculate Earthshatter. This is why Earthshatter is not gonna get nerfed, because people are just faking their PoB numbers out the ass on what this skill actually does. It is still really good for a league start because you can get insanely tanky in comparison to like a squishy bow character and actually have decent single target. Thanks for watching. See ya. Peace.